everyone. Welcome to Diving into the Discourse. My name is Sydnee Roddy, and I'm here with Carmen Ramos Chandler and Patricia Juarez-Dappe, a CSUN history professor, where today we'll be talking about the history of chocolate. Okay, Patricia, would you be able to give us some background on chocolate and how it was derived?
Well, pretty much, chocolate is, cacao is native to the Americas. It's not really clear exactly where is the first place where it was domesticated, but according to some archaeological records, it seems that it was domesticated sometime 5,000 years ago in Ecuador, and then it moved from there to Panama, and then from there to Mesoamerica. So that would be kind of the short story. After it moved to Mesoamerica, what we have is that many of the ancient cultures of Mesoamerica, they learn how to transform the cacao seed into chocolate, what we know, something kind of very not too close to what we know as chocolate today. And it seems that it was the Olmecs, the ones who actually started, who transformed the cacao seed into some chocolate concoction, although we are not very sure about it. But, archaeological records seems to indicate that it was the first culture that actually consumed chocolate. The Olmecs were really into culinary achievements. I mean, they're the ones who came up with the nixtamalization of maize, which is pretty much they transform maize into a much more nutritious grain. So this is another reason why archaeologists think that it was the Olmecs, the ones who actually found the way to do it. It's not easy. So you have the pod, which has to be open, and then you get the seeds, and it's like a pulp, and it has to be fermented. And then the seeds have to be roasted, and then they have to be dried, and then they have to, they have to peel them. So winnowing, that's how they call it. So it takes a while. But since the Olmecs were so savvy about their gastronomy, then we think that it was them, the ones who started it. Even though they are the first, civilization to actually consume chocolate, it was the Mayas, the one who actually made it into a high art. During the classic period, more or less, the Maya were the ones who started mixing chocolate with some spices, with honey. People tend to think that it was, the Europeans, the one who actually brought sweeteners into chocolate, and that's not actually true. Honey was used, but they also use other spices like vanilla, and they use a coloring bush, which is called achiato. And it's kind of interesting because the Maya not only used these three crops together, but also they found a way to cultivate them together. One of the things about cacao is that it needs a lot of shade and humidity, and so does vanilla. The achiato shrub provides that, and it needs a lot of sun. So the Maya not only were able to create these, incredible thing that we know as chocolate, but also they found ways to cultivate it in a sustainable way. So after that, all these knowledge was, passed on to other civilizations in Mesoamerica, and especially the Mexicas. And the Mexicas consumed chocolate in similar ways as the Maya. And then they also used cacao as a tribute. It was a very, very important tribute item, to the point that one area, which is located in Chiapas, which is one of the areas that had the largest, cacao plantations back in pre-Columbian times, which is Soconusco. When it was actually taken over by the Mexicas, they were expected to provide as tribute almost 5 million seeds cacao seeds twice a year. So the records Mendoza Codex actually shows that. So in addition to becoming a very important item of tribute, it was also used as a currency. So, for example, Bernal Díaz del Castillo, when he visited the Tlatelolcan market, he was, amazed at everything that he found there. And he mentioned that cacao beans were used as a form of currency, which doesn't mean that they were coins, or it doesn't mean that the Mexicas actually didn't remain using barter as their main exchange system, but cacao beans were very, very important. And there's some sources from the 1540s, I think, that actually list the value of a cacao seed. And for example, one bean was the equivalent of one avocado.
One bean.
One
little tiny bean.
Yes.
They're not that big.
They're like almonds. They're the size of almonds. As a matter of fact, this is kind of interesting. The very first time that Europeans came into contact with cacao, they thought they were almonds.
Oh.
They were confused. This was, Ferdinand Columbus. He saw the seeds, the beans, and he made fun of the natives because the natives were like, the beans were spilling and the natives were trying to get them. And he sort of made fun, thinking that they were just almonds, because he said, what are they doing? I mean, they're just almonds. It's not that important. But with one bean, you could buy one tomato. You could buy one avocado. You needed around 100 beans for a turkey.
So if you had a tree, and we're talking, how many beans on one tree?
Well, that depends. That's a great question. They're very difficult to get. So the first thing that happens is that the trees, they usually have around, maybe thousands of flowers. That out of 1,000 flowers, only 3 or 4 are going to be a pod. Mm-hmm. So you should think in terms of maybe a tree roughly getting about 40 to 50 pods. And each of those pods would have around 20 to 30 seeds or beans.
But still, that would make me rich.
Yes, of course, yes.
Were they considered sacred at that time, or were they just of high value?
That's a great question. Actually, they were both.
Okay.
So one of the things about cacao, and this was both for, Mayan culture and, the Mexica culture, they saw cacao as a plant that would connect them, with the divinity, with the gods. So when you look at archaeological records from Mayan times, you will see that there are on many occasions where cacao is being represented as a very, very important food that is connected to the divinity. So it did have a lot of spiritual connotations. Cacao was also used for, connecting the living with the death. So there was, for example, there was an archaeological site which is in Belize, which was in a cave. Archaeologists found it was a tomb, a burial site for a shaman, and they found, the body, the skeleton of this individual, and also found 5 cacao seeds. So it's not clear if the cacao seeds were part of his possessions because they were very valuable, or if they were actually used by him to move into the other side.
An offering.
Exactly. So cacao had that very important, profound spiritual connotation. We found in the codices there are some illustrations, for example, of gods going through some bloodletting rituals and using blood, dripping the blood on the cacao seeds. So it was super important for both the Mayans and the Mexicas. but I think that it was not only important, at the spiritual level, but it was also very important at the material level. So for both the Maya and the Mexica, chocolate and cacao had very important, powerful connotations in day-to-day life. So it was expensive. It was difficult to get. Not everybody had access to it. So it was a marker of wealth and power. The Maya, for example, the Maya elites, they would host banquets and feasts, and they would invite people, commoners, and they would give them chocolate, but also some cacao seeds as a gift. The guests would also not only have the opportunity to, try the beverage, but also they would take with them the pottery in which it was served. During those banquets, which were usually to celebrate a victory, what these elites were doing was pretty much reinforcing, their position as an elite. So it was a marker of social status. And they were creating these loyalties, right, with those who were participating. At the same time, those who were participating could claim that they had some connections because they had the pottery with them. So it was, there's one scholar who has argued that it was one form of wealth redistribution, these banquets that were hosted by Mayan elites. The Mexica also drank chocolate, and it was very important, again, not only as a currency and also as a tribute, but also it was a marker of social status, and it was one way for them to position themselves on top of, the society. And, another important use of chocolate and cacao was for medicinal purposes. So not only because it could cure a lot of things, from malnutrition to infertility, but also because it was used to mask the bitter flavor of other medicines. And and poisons as well.
Yes.
Poison, keep that in mind.
It's funny to think of that because I would imagine that if we're talking about chocolate at a point where there wasn't any sweeteners involved in it, how bitter it could be already, and to mask other flavors would be very interesting.
Well, they use honey, but also they use spices. So the spice was, vanilla, for example. That changed or, maybe ameliorated the bitterness of the cacao.
I'm just thinking, because I can go to my doctor and say, I need to have chocolate prescribed.
Well, you would be surprised, Carmen, but all throughout the 17th century, that is how Europeans got away, with accepting chocolate. So that's one of the things. So I'm going to kind of move in time right now,
definitely.
just go into the 16th, 17th century. So Hernán Cortés was the very first one who actually tried chocolate. Chocolate was in 90% of the time, in Mesoamerica, it was a drink. It was both the Maya and the Mexica, they made pastilles or wafers that they would give to the warriors for like an energy kick. But the way that Mesoamericans consumed chocolate was as a beverage. And it was a beverage that it was mixed with water. It was the French who actually brought milk into the chocolate. It was mixed with water and some spices. And then it was actually poured from one vessel to the other to create a foam. Because cacao seeds have a lot of fat. They have almost 50% of fat content. So the foam was, the fat. And the Maya would say that, the chocolate was for the body and the foam was for the soul. So the foam had these, spiritual element added to it. So the first thing that happened when the Europeans found about chocolate, we don't really know what Cortés thought about it. We know that Cortés pretty much very quickly figured out, that it had a lot of value. So he, among other things, he asked for, cacao plantations. But when it was actually taken to Europe, initially Europeans didn't really like the film. They thought it was gross and disgusting. So they would actually skim it. But then they realized that it was pretty good, right? I mean, who doesn't like hot cocoa, right? So, but they were not really. It created a lot of controversy and debate, right? Because here you have the colonizer suddenly adopting the food of the colonized. So in order for them to be able to justify the consumption of the food of the uncivilized, they need to come up with some kind of discourse that justifies it.
Yeah, because even though they were these indigenous residents of the Americas were sophisticated enough to develop a cuisine, and you see chocolate in all these ways, they were actually uncivilized.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. And, in order for you to be able to justify and claim superiority over the other, you need to pretty much do it at all levels, not only say that they don't have a religion or they don't have, anything, but just even that their food habits are disgusting. And that was actually the initial response. So when we look at discussions of cacao and chocolate in the 16th century, the early 16th century, most of the chroniclers are going to say that it was gross and disgusting. But then, one thing happened. The first thing was those who were in the Americas, they learned how to drink chocolate. Native women were the ones cooking for them. So, they kind of introduced chocolate into those Spanish conquistadores who are here. So after they went back to Spain, they brought with them, also their, newly adopted eating habits, chocolate being one of them. At the same time, the Spanish crown was already trying some chocolate. But they still needed to find some kind of justification. Why are we, drinking this? And the best justification that they found was to make it a medicine. So what we're going to see is that all throughout the 17th century, in the 1630s, I think it was, a Spanish physician published a whole book about the medicinal benefits of cacao and chocolate. And the book was translated into English. It went into several editions. It kind of became a bestseller.
Wow.
In England. So they were able to justify the consumption by saying that cacao was a very important medicinal plant and that chocolate could cure a lot of things. So that is how it was initially, accepted and adopted. So what we're going to see is that Europeans are going to be struggling with ways to be able to justify these newly acquired habits. And because Europe was so disease-ridden, right? I mean, if you look at the 1660s, in London, there was the bubonic plague, right? So they needed medicines.
And great tasty medicine.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
How did we move from the medicinal properties of chocolate, which we're all grateful for, and I will keep that in mind for the rest of my life and justify it beyond Valentine's Day. How did we move from the medicinal properties of chocolate to it now being seen as a treat, a dessert, sinful?
Well, that's a really great question. That happened around the 18th century. So after, doctors have accepted chocolate, after the church also decided that it was okay, what we're going to see is the elites, all the aristocracies in Europe are going to start consuming chocolate. And at that point, it's still, a very expensive commodity. It's a very difficult thing to make. So it is going to be used once again as a marker of social power and status. So all throughout the 18th century, it's going to be associated with wealth, with power, with idleness and indulgence, and eventually with, sex. It's not really clear when it started being associated with sex. I think that the Inquisition might have something to do with it. During, the 16th century and the 17th century, there are lots of trials in which women in the Americas, they were actually tried for sorcery or witchcraft, and they were using, according to these trials, they were using chocolate to mask, whatever, spell or whatever thing that they were trying to give into men. And, chocolate was also used in order to attract the love of somebody who, another person, right? So,
Wow.
So I think, and this is something kind of that makes me think that the Inquisition was not about chocolate. This is about women having power over men, right? So what the Inquisition is doing is pretty much trying to crack down, women who are trying to break with a patriarchy.
Out of curiosity, back when you were talking about the women doing all of the cooking and then the Spanish being in Mesoamerica, I was wondering if that had anything to do with like the connection to chocolate and sex. And I don't know if it was happening that early on, but if, chocolate was being introduced in food at that point, then I was wondering, would there be any correlation between those two things that early on, do you think?
Yes, you're absolutely right. Yes, that is when it started. Remember that, there were lots of unions that were not really acceptable, right? Mm-hmm. And, there is a connection between how chocolate or women using chocolate would actually promote those unions.
Wow.
So, yes, you're right.
Chocolate gave us our superpower.
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
When did we move from hot chocolate in a cup to bonbons?
Okay. That happened after the Industrial Revolution. So this is one of the most fascinating things about chocolate. Chocolate has been everywhere, so we can understand every single development in the history of humankind since the 1500s through chocolate, right? Mm-hmm. So we can understand or we can study or think about the Industrial Revolution through chocolate. So what in the 1820s and 1830s, chocolate manufacturers are going to start adopting some technological innovations, and those technological innovations eventually are going to lead to the chocolate bar. So the first one is pretty much there's going to be a press that it's going to be created that is going to separate the fat from, the cacao content. And then in the 1840s, 1850s, according to, the British, it was a Quaker whose name was Joseph Fry, the one who actually remixed part of the cacao butter and the cacao solids, and who is the first one to have created a chocolate bar.
Really?
Oh. So in terms of things, kept moving in the 19th century, and we're going to see that people are going to start investing more and more. Interestingly enough, in England, the first families who actually invested seriously in chocolate, they were all Quaker families. And they did it because they were limited in the kinds of options that they had. But also they did it because they thought that it was a really great way to prevent people from drinking alcohol.
Oh, yeah. Chocolate as an alternative to alcohol.
Yes.
Works in my book.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that is why in the 1920s in the United States, there was like a boom of the chocolate bar, right? I mean, during Prohibition. And I
That
think
makes
there's
so much sense.
Yes, right? There's even, I think there's a chocolate bar that's called 18th Amendment, but I don't know. I haven't been able to find kind of wrappings or anything that, but yeah, there is in the night, and I'm going back and forth in history, but in the 1920s is when the actual chocolate bar became like super, super popular in the U.S. And it's two reasons why people coming back after the war, they had developed a sweet tooth. But then at the same time, it was because Prohibition, people needed something, and chocolate was the option. And this is why between the 1920s and the actually it's during the 1920s, because during the Great Depression, people were not in the position to buy chocolate. So going back to, the British, it's Cadbury, the very first company that is going to not only make bars. So they're the second ones to make bars. The fries were the first ones. But, Cadbury is going to be the one that starts actually industrializing it and doing it very seriously. But they're also going to have a very aggressive marketing campaign. And as part of the marketing campaign, they're going to come up with the Valentine's chocolate and the heart-shaped box. So the heart-shaped box is an invention of the Cadbury family. And I think the very first one was somehow around the 1860s.
Wow, that's so long ago.
Yeah. They're the ones who invented the Easter egg, too. So.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, they were so smart. Yes.
Cadbury, England, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and they're actually also the very first ones to create a company town. So Hershey, Pennsylvania, but they did it in England, Bournville, and it was in the 1890s.
So a company town is where everybody who lives in the town, and nearly everybody works for the company.
Exactly, yes. Yeah, it's like what Hershey did here in Pennsylvania.
Do you get paid in chocolate?
Yeah, well, I think that would have been, what these corporations wanted to do, but,
Paying my rent in chocolate.
Thank you for joining us for diving into the discourse. You can watch and listen to more of our podcasts on the CSUN Conversations website and become part of the CSUN Conversations community.